Serious. What is a victimless crime? Attention. Serious. Tag notice. Jokes, puns, and off-topic comments are not permitted in any comment, parent or child. Parent comments that aren't from the target group will be removed, along with their child replies. Report comments that violate these rules. Posts that have few relevant answers within the first hour, and posts that are not appropriate for the serious tag will be removed. Consider doing an AMA request instead. Thanks for your cooperation and enjoy the discussion. I am a bot, and this action was performed automatically. Please contact the moderators of this subreddit if you have any questions or concerns. Sony 2. I want to know whose dumb idea was it at Sony HQ to not re-release the digital classics that are still left behind in the PS3 era. Need I make the mention that there are digital releases that otherwise don't require physical parts to run them, except needing the software and some hardware to properly emulate them? For fucking shame, Sony. And no, the mini console you released a couple of years back wasn't suitable enough. You left out classics in that shit, just like you left out classics that could have been re-released digitally but you didn't want to lift a finger and make business to make them available. So fuck you too. That's coming from a Sony faithful. Edit. I forgot one detail about how Sony handled BC with digital content. You can't even carry over digital purchases you've made through the PS3 marketplace on your account over to any other PlayStation console after PS3. I learned this from personal experience and it's equally as bullshit to happen. Nostalgia cash grabs. They're a thing. As others have said, emulating games you own, by ripping or dumping your own copies, and using BIOS files extracted from the consoles you own is perfectly legal. One thing I personally consider to also be ethically okay is downloading games that never got re-released on modern platforms, especially rare games. For example, there is a game called Panzer Dragoon Saga on the Sega Saturn. That game, considered to be one of the best ever made, suffered from poor sales at launch, which makes it rare. To add to that, allegedly the source code is lost, meaning it's impossible to re-release that game on modern platforms. The only way to get a copy of that game physically today is to buy it second-hand for upwards of $500 on eBay, and besides, even if you do decide to pay that ridiculous amount, the money doesn't even go to the developers. I know it's kind of a gray area, but it's just my opinion. I never understood this, even as a kid. If I was to pay my own hard-earned allowance to buy a game or movie, even though I owned the said item, it was illegal. Show my friends. I mean, I understood the industry has to get theirs, but like holy fuck. Later in life, South Park did an episode that summed it up so hilariously funny yet true. If you stream that song or watch that movie, the person who made it can only buy a $10 million house instead of a $15 million house. I look back at that time eating a bologna sandwich and ramen noodles and acknowledge I was so selfish to want to share any of that with friends. I do this all the time. Some of the large manufacturing facilities near us have scrap bins where they toss metal, broken parts, tools, equipment, etc. No garbage. They pay for it to be removed by weight or volume depending on the contract. I hop in those dumpsters and pull out expensive metal scrap, hardware, fittings, used drill bits, etc. I have a stack of aluminum in our shed probably worth $8,000 that I pulled out of a dumpster. I know some of the managers at those facilities and their exact words were, "You're saving us money, but if you get hurt in the process it's on you." I had a conversation with a homeless guy about this once. He said he only panhandled occasionally. According to him, the best place was outside sporting events. Just tell people you need beer money and one half of them will give it to you. Anyway, he made most of his money from dumpster diving. This is how he did it. He would jump in and start going through the trash. Anything he wanted he would throw out of the dumpster to his left. Anything he didn't want he would throw out to the right. I support the homeless. As it were. Homeless rights. That's it, I guess. I am disgusted by things like park benches with bars on them for instance, but I get it about dumpster diving. Some guy just threw all, or most, of your trash out of the dumpster onto the ground. The trash company isn't going to clean that up for you, you have to do it. My first job was at a grocery store. We threw away a lot of food and we locked the dumpsters so people couldn't get into them. I actually made it a point to ask the manager why we couldn't donate that food to homeless shelters or something. He said it was against policy. Holy shit, for fuck's sake. He didn't even know what that reason was. Pretend you're human and find out, and then figure out how to make it happen. P.S. I do understand, now, some of the issues. Expired food may not be an edible food, but you are opening yourself up to criticism, lawsuits if you give it to someone to eat. I still think a massive company could use their lawyers for something, novelty, good for a change and actually help some people. Example of this, I purchased Far Cry 5 digitally only to be astounded by how terribly it performed and it micro-stuttered constantly. After some research I found out Ubisoft's DRM is just awful, so I acquired a cracked copy that worked perfectly. No more stuttering because they bypassed the DRM layers. That type of crap that punishes paying customers is absurd. For people who don't believe me, look into Overlord Gaming's DRM tests or check out Digital Foundry or Modern Vintage Gamer's tests of the abysmal Revillage DRM, which causes stuttering. Since it blew up though, at least Capcom patched the DRM in their game, but crappy DRM implementations which harm performance and or cause stuttering do happen. Since some people seem to be replying without reading the article, it's worth repeating that all such laws were overturned by the Supreme Court in 2003 with no realistic prospect of that changing anytime soon. Most of us can agree that it would be better if such laws were also legislatively overturned. But I am personally more worried about bad laws that are still valid. The objection that cops might still try to enforce invalidated laws is correct but not severe. When there are laws that never existed in the first place that get erroneously enforced more often. Those are old laws left on the books after the Supreme Court ruling in 2004. They aren't investigated or even pursued if reported. Yes, there are people who are nosy enough to report you for your sex life, because the laws, more accurately the necessary steps required to enforce those laws, have been ruled unconstitutional. The laws themselves still exist because no one in the state house of a Bible Belt state wants to be known as the guy who made Sodom illegal by repealing the law. That would be political suicide, even for a Democrat. https://www.tesson.co.uk/fabulous/food/4372753/illegal eat mince pies Christmas Day origins law/ Depends who you ask. It is a myth that mince pies are banned on Christmas Day. According to the BBC, the ban didn't survive when Charles II became king. The Law Commission said none of the 11 laws that remained on the statute books after Cromwell's reign related to mince pies. However, historian Mark Conley from the University of Kent has claimed that the ban of eating mince pies still hasn't been abolished. He said, Cromwell held that if you're caught eating a mince pie on Christmas Day, you're definitely trying to celebrate the Span Festival. In Wrightsville Beach, North Carolina, it is illegal to ride a bicycle without using both hands to steer. So, I'm a criminal defense attorney and I am going to share a sort of multi-year mental, philosophical battle I had relevant to this topic. When I was in high school, I took a criminal justice elective course. One day, during class, we discussed the topic of victimless crimes. Crime, obviously, is something that is against the law. However, it is generally understood that a crime is an act harmful not only to some individual but also to a community, society, or the state. So, by its very nature, there should not be a such thing as victimless crime, because crime necessarily requires a victim. So, of course, we bring up that drug use, marijuana as a primary example, does not create a victim. My teacher's argument was that there are numerous victims of drug use. The user who may accomplish less than they would but for the substance use, children of the user who may receive inadequate care because of the use, or simply the parent having less money, friends and family of the user who may receive less attention or whatever from the user, etc. For a number of years I generally accepted that as a valid point. There is victims of drug use, for whatever reason, This stuck in my mind for a long time, and when I was in law school I was researching something of a similar nature when it finally fucking occurred to me: crime requires a victim. So, while a drug user may not properly provide care for their child, the drug use isn't a crime. The crime is child abuse, and the drug use is an aggravating factor. Which brings me back to the no riding a bicycle with no hands thing. Riding a bicycle with no hands does not necessarily create a victim, so it is not a crime. I mean, it's illegal, but that is bullshit for anyone who understands what crime is. Philosophically, failing to heed the traffic is a crime because negligence caused an accident that would not have otherwise occurred, creating victims. If you fail to heed because you were riding a bicycle with no hands, that is an aggravating factor, but the no hands thing is not a crime. It is an attempt to prevent other crime by prohibiting victimless behavior. The user who may accomplish less than they would but for the substance use, children of the user who may receive inadequate care because of the use, or simply the parent having less money, friends and family of the user who may receive less attention or whatever from the user, etc. This isn't an actual argument. Neglecting a child is the event, not why they did it. All of these things can be applied to video games. If I spend money on video games, I have less to spend on my kid. Does that mean that my hobby is a crime and my son the victim? Of course not. Criminal neglect is a crime. Playing video games isn't. Even if I was neglecting my child for the sake of a video game. These are actual lawyers saying this shit. It is an attempt to prevent other crime by prohibiting victimless behavior. Isn't most of law built like this? Wild camping, get rid of loud people who leave trash behind, fireworks. Because too many people don't understand that you need to do it safely. Cameras. People put anything on the internet. Getting it down is impossible. I mean, it always boggles my mind when something is perfectly legal in one place, but the serious crime somewhere else. Like, you're just chilling 180 kilometers per hour on German highway, totally cool and acceptable. Then suddenly country border and you lose your driving license because you missed the sign. Maybe you're even on the local news. In most places it's not actually illegal, but you can end up legally owning them, meaning being liable for their upkeep and any harm they cause, since the law makes them yours by simply and even occasionally caring for them. And I'm a person who doesn't like the cat man on my street, but who also tried to call the county to pick up stray newborn kitties born in my backyard. But the county refused unless I could catch them. Not about to Rumpelstiltskin me. That one is because it's extremely hard to make sure there's no coercion. Look at any of the AMAs about porn stars and how messed up their industry is. But the cat's out of the bag on that one and it's not going back in. It's a lot easier to deal with abuse when the whole thing is illegal. Then you don't have to prove little details like consent. Now, does the benefit outweigh the problems it caused by being illegal? That's a different story. It's a preventative law. Studies done in Germany found that legalized prostitution leads to more sex trafficking. Legalization increases demand for sexual services, and sex traffickers, eager to meet this demand, coerce their victims to work through legal outlets. Demand would have to be controlled in such a way that law enforcement could keep up with the new demand, and shady brothel owners couldn't use plausible deniability to hire coerced prostitutes. Safe, legalized prostitution is possible to ensure. Nevada has done a good job at it, but it's also expensive. Unless some political force galvanizes around the issue, no politician will champion the issue, as they'd have to sacrifice the support of puritanical voters. Forms of prostitution is illegal in my country, but there are still obvious sex trafficking brothels. Like, you can't get a work visa to work in the industry, but there are loads of brothels that specifically offer girls from Russia, Thailand, and China. The only way those girls could work there is via a visa scam where they are married to a national and have a spouse visa, since spouse visas allow you to work any job and you don't have to inform immigration of your job status. Also, the yakas who run these brothels hunt for local talent by harassing young naive girls and getting them hooked on drugs, and then the girls work for their drugs. That's what happens when there is a supply and demand issue when it comes to sex. Lot of reasons, but I'll stick with the original reasons. It was an extension of the temperance movement and women's suffrage. Basically, women in the late 19th/early 20th century hated that their husbands would spend all their money on drinking and whoring, bringing home incurable and often fatal diseases and often becoming violent towards them and their children. And since divorce wasn't an option because women weren't really allowed to work either, they wanted a way out of this hell. Thus prostitution laws and prohibition. People don't seem to realize how much people drank and whored back in the day. The year where we finally consumed more alcohol than the year before prohibition was 2020. Pre-prohibition, 2 gallons per person. 2020, 2.3 gallons per person. One thing to consider is that nowadays men and women drink fairly evenly. Back in the day it was mostly men, so the average per man is likely still higher than 2.3 gallons/year. Then you have 7 gallons a person. As a city worker, please don't do this. If you're going to do a temporary fix, it may get overlooked as completed. If we still have it on our list, yes. It's ungodly long here in Minnesota as we have a full crew doing it 8 hours a day all summer. Then instead of just showing up to fill it, takes a few minutes, we have to undo what you did, which can be as simple as scooping out class 5 or having to break and dig out whatever cheap, crappy asphalt you bought from Home Depot, then get to filling it. So instead of taking 5-6 minutes to do the hole, now it's taking 20-25 minutes, and that means we get to less holes. Then there's liability. We have safety signs, lights, PPE, etc. to protect us when we're in the streets. You don't. You have a shovel and a vest, maybe. Also, it may be something more pressing than a pothole. Could be a sinkhole, could have exposed utilities, could have exposed the sewer system, etc. All things that need more attention than some hat mix. It sucks, but leave it alone. We don't come into your job if something we need is taking a while to get done. We have 119 miles of road to cover and only 18 workers with 5 dedicated to potholes, patching those 119 miles of city road. Victimless, or no victim according to the law, because California has Prop 65, which made it possible to sue businesses for failing to warn of cancer-causing hazards even if no damage occurred. The concept was to hold businesses responsible for warning people of the hazards to avoid the penalty even if there was no victim. But what it really caused was a huge influx of civil suits where lawyers, or their agents, would just walk around and file a lawsuit against any business or building that didn't have a Prop 65 warning posted. How technical do you want to get? Simplified, it's a crime where only the perp or the perp and a willing, consenting person are involved. In most cases, it's a mal or prohibita crime, illegal only because someone decided it should be. Personal drug use, prostitution, sexual behavior, such as homosexuality, possession of contraband, or assisted suicide. Suicide was one that could be punished, which always confused me. The problem is, does it exist? A man who goes to a prostitute, has sex, and then takes an STD home to his wife is a good example. Some argue the wife is the victim and demand prostitution be illegal. But, what stops him from finding a willing woman, free of charge, who could infect him just as easily? Prostitution is enforced, but adultery and fornication are not. Homosexuality is another. For ages, 2 gay men were condemned for sex. Some claimed this was immoral and spread homosexuality and disease. Some even claimed it was a sin against God. Yet, a man and woman can do the same things and it was fine. Anal and oral sex were accepted, even if forbidden by some religions. A big one today is recreational drug use. Here, you have 2 serious groups. One claims that it is wrong and harms society. The use of it is a burden on the healthcare system too. The other claims it is a right and points out it was legal before the 1970s. Several of the illegal drugs are former medicines or natural herbs that have been used to treat diseases. They are rarely inflicted on others intentionally, though they have been. Where it gets messy is with child porn, bestiality, incest, and so on. Legally, we say that children are too young to give consent or be willing participants, and, This is normally true. However, you have teenagers who willingly send nude photos to others and have children from sexual relations. Bestiality should be a no-brainer, but some say animals have no rights. Incest is mixed. Some argue that it should be legal with consent, such as between adults. Now, in fairness, most of these who argue these things are rarely neutral. NAMBLA, for instance, has a vested interest in seeing children and adults sexually active. I believe they cite the Greeks here, but I could be wrong. Those involved in bestiality tend to be for it legally, as are those involved in incestual relationships. In other words, they have a vested interest in seeing their side win. The other side has its reasons too, such as religious or morality.